Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. What we'd like to begin with is we've had a lot of protests, possibly, which have turned into movements. If you talk about the anti-Sterlite protests, you talk about the Kodai Canal mercury poisoning, you talk about even what happened at the back of the Kerala floods, you talk about even what's happening right now in the national capital. Having said that, I think coming from Delhi, possibly when we go into elections next year, the air would be one of the main reasons that we would keep in mind to possibly engineer a political change, because I think a lot of us Delhiites feel that it's become now crucial that be the benchmark of either a policy in Delhi. Do you think it can happen? Do you think it can happen across the country as well? Do you think there will be a time when the environment issues can actually become political and be the base of vote? Sir, why don't you start, Mr. Nityanand?
I think that environmental issues have been political issues for a very long time. The problem is the politics of the day and the business of the day are not prepared to listen to the environmental voices or the voices that are speaking for the environment. So if you take the land struggles in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, those are environmental struggles. The struggle to protect the forests are environmental struggles. And they are political struggles as well. But if you're talking about election politics, then it becomes an entirely different ballgame, because there only the people who matter seem to play a big role. And finally, the people that we elect to power, so the masses elect people to power who finally end up representing classes and representing the corporates. And that, I think, prevents us from seeing that real environmental fights are being fought on the ground in the communities every single day of the year. And those fights are in the form of fights against what the government puts across as development. It might be the Sagar Malas or the Bharat Malas or the smart cities or the industrial corridors. These are all issues where communities are mobilizing to protect the environment, and the businesses prevail.
You know, when we talk about the vote, and you know, what we're talking about possibly engineering political change, to give you an example, and I'll bring you in, Mr. Vishwanath, on that, and let's look what has happened in the last couple of elections, where the politics of the day has come to realize that farm loan waiver actually engineered a political change in 3 states. And now we're actually talking about a national farm loan policy. Do you think if we were to talk about the environment and if people could come together on that account, they could possibly have a very strong environment policy that could be engineered in this country? Because I think the politics and politicians will only understand when it transcends into votes.
Well, I'm slightly pessimistic on this count. If you take a look at history itself, if you see a good green political party emerging in Germany, for example, it only happened in 1980, right? Not very long ago, 38 years back. And the German Green political party, which brought the environment into the limelight, has not done very well. Right now in the elections, it's not there in power, right? If you look at the Indian context especially, I think you will find that environmental issues are at the top, but the solutions, people cannot relate to it in a political context. Just about a week back, the Karnataka government said no to the Kasturi Rangan committee report, which was a diluted version of the Madhu Gadgil committee report on protecting the Western Ghats. At the grassroots level, at villages and cities and towns, what's happening is that you're positing the environment or a protection of the environment vis-a-vis a road, a bridge, or a water supply line. Now, this argument is a false argument, and as like Nitya was pointing out, the 5-year cycle of political mobilization in democracy, vis-a-vis the long-term 25, 30-year environmental mobilization that's required, these are out of sync. And therefore, I do not see environment occupying positions in a political party manifesto itself, let alone...
You know, you come from Bangalore.
Yes.
And we were there this time during elections in Karnataka. And especially in the city of Bangalore, you have a very active citizenship in terms of vis-a-vis the environment. And you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we did see a possible change which was brought about just by the citizenry, where you were talking about the frothing lakes, or you were talking about, you know, possibly Bangalore looking at a 0 day in terms of water. So, right. And for the first time, we did see a very positive response coming in from the leadership, the politicians, and, you know, and we were talking to the people. So even the manifesto, the Bangalore had a specific manifesto, and that's good. to have a city-specific manifesto which talks about the frothing lakes, which talks about the environmental hazard. So are you still pessimistic about that?
Yeah, I'm still pessimistic about it, and I'll give you a reason why. With all the positioning that local groups did on local resources, protecting surface water bodies, looking at rainwater, looking at groundwater and recharge, the solution now being posited by the government of Karnataka is something called the Mekedatu project.
Right.
Right? And the political manifestation of the problem identification, which is environmental, is another large, gigantic project. And if you look at the Bellandur Lake, where it was frothing and foaming, the only solution could come from the courts. It was the National Green Tribunal which had to ask the political parties and the institutions in charge to do something. And they have not been able to do anything for the last 3 years. So still it's not being internalized politically because people still do not vote on the environment.
Exactly, and that's the point. And Amrit, before I bring you in, I'd like to bring in Mr. Nityanand again on this. You know, we talk about the courts. Very often we've seen in this country that the courts are the ones that are delivering environmental justice, not the people, not the politicians, but it's come from the courts, even if we go to the history of it all, hasn't it?
I think it has primarily come from the people. I think courts are an extremely fickle partner.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah, and I also find that oftentimes the courts are not as powerful as they used to be.
Okay.
There is not the respect for the courts that they used to be. And also the final thing is the courts treat big polluters differently from small polluters. There is a very clear class difference in how they don't want to take on the big guys. So in Tamil Nadu right now, after the floods, they're talking about removal of encroachments, but none of the lordships talk about the big encroachments. So you have entire power plants and ports built inside water bodies. Who will remove them? They are encroachments too. But I think that there the kind of the courage withers away.
All right, okay. Amrit, would you want to come in? When do we, yes, environment is political, it is a political issue, it bands people together, but it doesn't quite translate into votes yet.
I mean, it's always been a political issue, and it's the environment of politics. I think when it really penetrates deep into the society, when people actually feel, I mean, we feel it every day, all the time, but I think for the common man, he doesn't feel the pinch yet. Maybe he's not been made aware of it. So I think it's very important to educate the common man. I'm here as a common man, not as an expert on pollution or environment, but I think it's very important to reach that message to them on the adversities of environmental pollution. And we need to figure out a way how we can do that. And yes, once they are made aware of it, I think it will really have an effect on the votes.
You know, Mr. Vishwanath, I'll pull you in on this because you're talking about voter awareness. And I'll give you a micro example of what I started with. Coming in from Delhi, I think we've reached a point where air pollution has become the biggest leveler. So whether you're riding in your whatever XYZ class Mercedes or you're pulling a rickshaw, you're equally affected by the air. And it's happened now to us, I think 3 years running, like 3 consecutive terms running in terms of every 5 years. And every 5 years promises are made. And now we can see, at least I can as a journalist, as somebody who is from the national capital, realize a sense that the next time a government comes in, the air pollution would possibly be as big as it could be your health policy, it could be any basic things that a government is run on. And how do you think then voters will come together? Because you said you were pessimistic, that they needed to band together.
Yes.
So does it have to be a disaster like the Kerala floods? Does it have to be, because we think it's apocalypse in Delhi. If we continue like this, we won't be able to go on longer.
So the apocalypse is not denied, right? But it'll be worthwhile to see what will the political parties say about the solutions to that problem, right? And how will they present themselves as finding those solutions which citizens need,
right,
and whether citizens will vote on that particular issue predominantly when they vote. It's unlikely that will happen. I'll just draw your attention to a larger, bigger environmental disaster, the whole disaster of agriculture and climate change and what it's doing to our groundwaters and what it's doing to our soil. Those who are impacted by it, the common man that you were referring to, or the common woman who's there, impacted in the villages, is absolutely powerless to do anything about this, about this particular impact, right? So the impact on the environment is by the large corporations, the large consumers, the large industries who do the polluting, but it's felt by the poorest of the lot. And then you have deniers at the President of the United States level about climate change. See, so we're caught in a cleft.
Yeah, this is a very blurry picture which we are actually looking at. And Mr. Nityanand, I'll get you back into, Mr. Nityanand, yes, I'll bring you back into this conversation. And the question that we were taking in from what he was saying there, if this is what it is, then what will it take? What is it that it will take that you can actually impact environment change, which is positive?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of in the realm of astrology. But what I can definitely say is that disasters will provide us with opportunities. And I think it is good at this point of time to have disasters, probably not in rapid succession, because then we tend to normalize even that. But for instance, when the Chennai floods happened, there was a momentary lapse of unreason, if I may. So there was a sudden kind of an awakening, and there was a lot of discussion about construction and water bodies and encroachments. And that, while that has not lasted among the political class or the bureaucrats, it has made a big change in the way young people look at things. And I'm banking my hope entirely on the youth. From Tamil Nadu, I find that there is a lot of young people who are interested in the right kinds of agriculture, who have a very healthy critique of this corporate, this growth-oriented, growth-manic kind of an economy, a very healthy critique, along with a rootedness with the land, which I think will make or break our possibilities. So I'm not pessimistic. I mean, I'm an activist, so I'm very clearly not pessimistic. There is a hopeless optimist in me. But at the same time, I think that I think that we are not going to learn by ourselves and plan ourselves to slow down. It will be disasters that bring us down and then allow us to hopefully rebuild more sensibly.
So, Amrit, do you reckon with, so is it to start from there, possibly the people, the youth, as Mr. Nityanand is saying, to engineer a larger change, or possibly work from the top, which is to engineer a strong environment policy?
I think it's very important to start at the grassroots level, to begin the education, to bring in the awareness now. A small example is the use of plastic bags and plastic straws. I'm sorry, Ma, if you're watching this live, but my mother is an educated woman. But still, when I tell her don't take plastic bags, just take plastic cloth, it still doesn't hit her. So I think now the youth have to be made aware of it, made aware of the adversities of environment pollution. So I think it has to start at the grassroots level, and when the youth are aware of it, and I think like there will be a movement. Like Nityanand said, there have been efforts to get corporates and industries to do something about this, but there's like the court only looks at they look at the big polluters and the small polluters in a different way. So I think the change has to start from the grassroots level, from the common man, to be made more aware of it.
So corporate social responsibility, Mr. Nityanand, like in Delhi now we've had Starbucks move on to paper straws, or they ask you whether you want a plastic cup.
No, I think corporate social responsibility is an oxymoron. Corporations are an artificial, it's a legal construct. Responsibility is a very human thing. And so it's just like saying, does this wall have responsibility? It does not. So a corporation, I'm not saying that corporations are bad or good. A good corporation is a corporation that makes a lot of money for its shareholders. Its job is not to build toilets in the villages. That is for my government to do, and I'll make them do it. As far as Starbucks giving plastic and paper straws, that is the superficiality of environment as we understand it. I mean, you have an entirely exploitative engine that finally gives you your environmental karma by sipping it out of a paper straw instead of a plastic straw. This kind of sipping is not going to get us out of the environmental. So? No. I think you can carry all the jholas that you want, all the plastic paper straws, and ride a bicycle to hell. I think what we're talking about is there's something called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. On 8th of October, they released a shattering report which sunk like a stone in the Indian media. And that report basically gives us 12 years. This is the world's top scientists have told us, you have 12 years to get your act together. 2 years to decide whether you want to do it or not. And in the 12 years, if you don't radically change, which means that virtually every single coal-fired power plant that we propose to build right now should not be built, cannot be built. If you do not commit to that kind of a change, cataclysmic climate change and its effects are almost certain. And here we are trying to figure out whether we really think it's a good idea to replace plastic straws with paper straws.
Fair enough, fair enough. So there is, a very myopic way that possibly most of us look at the environment, most of us know, because I would reckon if you think that you're using a plastic bag, and I'll bring you in, Mr. Vishwanath, on that, or you're doing away with your plastic, or you're picking away the plastic from the beach, you've dealt with the plastic, but you quite haven't dealt with that plastic, have you?
Well, you haven't. So here's the tough act. And as much as my friends love activism and they have faith in the youth, the thing that we need to do is to build institutions. Build institutions which are responsible at levels and scales at which they can act. There's a missing gap between politics and the people, which are institutions. And we had sorted that out in the 20th century.
So do you think somewhere down the line we're basically shifting the onus of responsibility on our politicians?
No, we have to find and get our politicians to build the right institutions. I'll just give you an example. In the 20th century, we built very good water utilities like the Delhi Jal Board or the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board,
yes,
which got water to our cities and gave and delivered that water, right? Through long distance pipes and large dams and all that. Now, we need 21st century institutions. We do not have those institutions. We do not have those institutions capacitated to be able to understand and address the problem in the right way. Solid waste management is a classic example. It's being addressed by local governments who simply don't have the skill set or the ability to deal with the problem. And we've been breaking our heads for the last 20 years. So it's not a matter of cleaning up a plastic bag. It's about getting all those plastic bags cleaned by an institution or not delivered in the market by an appropriate institution. That institution should also be accountable. What we now face are institutions which are, there's nobody you find accountable for the pollution of the Ganga, for example. Who's responsible for the Ganga, which is this iconic river that we've been trying to clean for the last
which has gotten only dirtier.
Yes. So where is the institution? So we need something like a river basin institution, which is capacitated with hydrologists, hydrogeologists, social people, and people from ecological backgrounds into them. And finally, we need transparency among these institutions to put the figures and data before us, for us to understand as people as to what we need to pressurize the politicians to do. Right now, there's a complete absence of data. We know, for example, that there's so much carbon in the atmosphere, but what do we do about it? I mean, who are the institutions accountable for that 2-year window of opportunity that we have?
Nobody quite knows about it, because I'm quite sure most of us right here are feeling rather happy, or you're just feeling that, when you talk about environmental karma, that you're happy that you got yourself a cloth bag, or you refuse to drink out of a plastic cup because you just think that the buck stops there and you've done your bit. But Amrit, I'll bring you in because this is the academic look at it. You're a musician and you talk about the environment from possibly the prism of a musician. How do you see it differently, or are you as cynical as them?
No, I am very cynical.
You are.
And that's why we work together.
Okay, no, right.
No, but I think art is the most important tool. Communication,
yes.
Yes, to communicate, to question the status quo, to seek answers from ourselves, from the system. So I think it's a very, very important tool, extremely important tool. And music especially. So I've taken baby steps in this path. And I write songs about issues that affect me and they affect the city or place I live in. So I think it's very important to, for a musician, there has to be a time in their lives or in their career where they have to write about, society and important things that matter, and not just about how I woke up one day in the morning or how I saw a girl or how I fell in love. You can do that, but I think it's very important to, it's also a responsibility for an artist to influence the society. So I think it's very important to have art as a tool, and that's how we also worked on one of the projects recently for Kodaikanal, where we brought out a song, and it also took a rap song 2 years ago to get them to act, to make people aware of it. So I think art and music in particular goes a long way to influence.
Yes, yes. Would you like to, you said you did put together a song, so before we get back to the conversation, you want to lighten the mood possibly and give out a message there.
Yeah, so I wrote a song about water, and it's very important. I don't see it just as a song as part of the album. It's very personal to me as well, and as someone who lives in Chennai now, all of us were affected by the Chennai floods. So the song talks about the floods, illegal construction, the pollution, chemical pollution, water pollution, the air, and all these are interconnected. It's a chain, and in Chennai especially, the water bodies are very, very important. There are about 320 tanks, ponds, and other water bodies, and rivers like Kuam and Adyar River, which run across the city for about 22 kilometers. It covers about 22 kilometers of the metropolitan area. And these are now just dumping places. So this made me write a song called Tanni, which is water. And also talks about every June there is this whole agitation between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's
You're
like
all too familiar with it.
yeah, it's like an annual thing. Every June or from June to September, there is this thing going on. People from here can't cross over to Karnataka. So I think these things made me write a song, and the song starts with Tanni Aarukku Sondam. Aaru Yarukku Sondam, which translates to water belongs to the river, but who does the river belong to? So I'll just probably sing a couple of lines.
Yes.
If you can follow me, all you have to do is do just this, okay?
We can all do that.
But together.
You want us to start now or wait?
Okay, I'll do that.
No.
தண்ணி ஆருக்கு சொந்தம், ஆறு யாருக்கு சொந்தம்? தண்ணி ஆருக்கு சொந்தம், ஆறு யாருக்கு சொந்தம்? நிக்காம வந்தாலும் போனாலும் கேட்டாலும் தப்பு. காத்துக்கும் ஆத்துக்கும் நாத்துக்கும் வேலிகளிப்போ. காத்து யாருக்கு சொந்தம், காத்தாடிய கேப்போம்.
Thank you. Please raise a warm applause. I think that was very sporting. Thank you, Amrit. All right, so now let's steer the conversation back and we'll once again come to Mr. Nityanand, and we'll talk about, but a lot of us are very worried and very anxious on how you reduce your carbon footprint. That, and also how do you impact a larger change? What would be, for somebody who's been in this, what would be your advice?
So, I mean, very simple ways in which individuals can do these things, there are, and I will share some of those, because it's also very important for people to feel empowered to be able to do something, but at the same time to also understand that simple, my little bit is not enough, and we have to get the society, and as Vishwanath said very clearly, institutions have to be built, and the institutions are the right kind of people in it. Very simple, the most dangerous part of your garbage is the organic waste, in a sense that if you let it go out to the wrong place, it can make a mess of everything. And it makes the entire problem of discards unmanageable. And your organic waste can be kept at home, even if it's a small home. And if it's too small a home, then you can have a street level solution. So that's called composting. It can be started. You don't have to wait for the government to come in and act on that. But while you're doing it at home, you also try and get the government to put in a system. The other, of course, issue is slightly more difficult. It is to do with public transportation. And public transportation in cities where it is horrible makes it particularly difficult for old people to travel or for women to travel. And so there, I think while men might have the luxury of taking public transportation, unless you actually fight for a good public transportation policy, you're not going to be able to get it. Other simple ways in which you reduce your carbon footprint for the people who can afford it, to have your places of work close to where you are, and probably, cycle there or walk there. Walking is a good option. The other things are inside your home, changing the kind of lighting and energy efficient devices. And finally, at an institutional level, if you're working in, say, in a company or in a college, often we have celebrations like this. And these celebrations are also opportunities for us to try and showcase how things can be done differently. For instance,
I'm gonna,
this.
yeah, I was going to, yeah.
So this is like a classic, nice 200 milliliter disaster. And this disaster has become a ritual. Earlier, this disaster used to come in 1 liter bottles. But now, for some reason, it's getting smaller. Because this guy makes more money for every time you sell a smaller bottle. This can be easily done away with. What the hotel staff drink is good enough for what we drink. It can be put inside jugs and brought in over here. And I think this is something that we should be looking at very actively. And these are very simple things. How do you take a festival, which is something that all of us constantly do, and make the rituals meaningful, make the rituals environmentally sustainable, which means you reduce your environmental footprint, and make it socially just, which means you enlarge your social footprint. That would give us a great task. I mean, let's say that next year's India Today conclave, you look at it from the point of view, from the lens of environment and social justice, and I think you'll have a brilliant, really fun conclave without transferring a hangover to somebody else.
Well, we're going to endeavor towards that, and let's hope we can make that possible. You want to add, Mr. Vishwanath wants to add to that.
With due respects to my colleagues and bearded and long-haired colleagues, which is typical of environmentalists and ecologists.
You tick all the boxes, though.
Yeah, so we're sort of testing.
The jhola tick, long hair tick.
Yeah, but here's the thing, that my friend who sings songs will only be able to sing dirges.
Okay.
In like a Rudali of old, right? You can only mourn the environment. You're not able to set an agenda which will change or transform. You can critique the PET water bottle, but we will not ask as to why are we using this bottle? Why is it that there's no 24/7 potable water in all the taps in all our cities? Why is it that we have 33 million borewells sucking the groundwater dry and killing our rivers? Why is it that we do not have sewage treatment plants to make sure that there's no polluted water going into the rivers? These are tough questions of governance. They will not be addressed by your and my individual action. That individual action is just a panacea. It's like putting Band-Aid on chicken pox. What we need to do is to ask the tough questions and to find the right answers.
But and I'll bring you in on this. You say that those are individual choices or, would not engineer a larger change. But if these individual choices band together, then don't you reckon a larger change is in the offing? No, you're shaking your heads. Yeah. No. Okay.
Yeah, we can go like that, but I'm sorry to say individual actions will not make a difference.
So I guess you're saying we need to be more aware because...
We need to ask the tougher questions and set the systems right at scales which will actually make a difference. You need to create a unified metropolitan transport authority for every city, which will make sure that public transport and metros...
So tell me the 3 questions I need to ask my government today if I want to engineer an ecological, safe change for my city.
Where are our institutions?
Where are the institutions like what?
Institutions like a river basin institution at a river basin scale to manage groundwater and surface water and wastewater. Whereas the Urban Management Transport Authority, a unified one, which takes care of all transport planning so that Delhi does not have smoke flowing through its individual cars that are going there. Where are our institutions? How capacitated are our institutions? And how transparent and accountable are they? If we are able to answer these 3 questions and get those right institutions at state level, at city level, and at village level.
But we come in the way of that. We saw a classic case that in the national capital that yes, possibly our public transport wasn't up to par. But when the government of the day did try to bring in a radical change with odd and even, and they did try to do that. So it seemed very good on paper, but who made them change it the next year around? Because it's the citizens, sadly so, of the national capital that banded together and said, we'd throw you out next term if you ever bring this back in. So there's a dichotomy there as well.
No, yes, that's true. I think that one of the things that you said earlier, that the guy who's driving a Merc is gassed out as badly as a rickshaw puller. I don't think that is true. I think that there is, within the experience of the environment, your status, your caste, everything matters a hell of a lot. Your gender matters a hell of a lot. And so even in the question of, even in the articulation of the problem and the articulation of the solution. So in this instance, for instance, with the odd and even, it's only people who own odd number or even number license plate cars, which means it's a car owning or private vehicle owning public that revolted. It was not the rickshaw puller who revolted. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is,
the middle class.
The middle class, which is it's a class, it's not the mass. It's a very small but substantially powerful population. So there we see a failure of politics where the aspirations, desires, and the health of a large number of people who suffer because of the externalization of private vehicles. So the private vehicle owners are occupying a disproportionate amount of space on the roads and belching out a disproportionate amount of smoke that affects a large number of people, including particularly the poor who do not own those cars. So there is an environmental injustice in this. And to rectify this environmental injustice, again, the whole issue of power comes in, and the people who are suffering the most are powerless. So I think that in a sense, what also needs to be done to add to what has been said is that the poor need to be empowered. How do their voices come in to create solutions and also to articulate problems? And actually, I like what you had said about the Belandur Lake, about the irrigation. So if you could also share that, that would be great.
Here we have the lake which is frothing and foaming, right? So the urban imagination to sort that problem is to set up sewage treatment plants and treat the wastewater. But the rural imagination of the same wastewater 4 kilometers downstream is to pick it up and use it as a fertilizer in their fields. If we make sure that there's no health risk with that wastewater use, for example, if you grow non-edible crops like mulberry or trees, then it's perfectly fine to take that water there and use it for that kind of an imagination. So we lack our institutions and we lack imaginations of solutions which are pro-poor.
Amrit, what do you think? Are we, in your mind, for someone who is worried about the environment, what is this one big ecological hazard or a disaster that's just waiting to happen? Of course, he talks about, if we keep producing coal, we are just, how many, 2 years you said, Mr. Nityanand, that we have? No?
I'd not talk about one big. I don't think there's one big anything.
Okay.
There's a whole, if there is one big thing that I find, one big disease that needs to be treated, it is our economy. It's our economic model that believes that you can have an unlimited growth on a finite planet. That is the madness that needs to be changed.
I think another one is freedom of expression.
Well, yeah, it ties very well with the ecology.
Yeah,
yes.
right. But other than that, I think, we've also spoken about it. We spoke about it over lunch, about, the guidelines and standards, the Pollution Control Board, that, we have to have standards that are, equivalent to Europe, to have that kind of, bring in that kind of impact and change.
Do we have that kind of infrastructure? It's a very cliched argument to make, to bring in standards, European standards. We have that kind of infrastructure, like public transport to support it. Sadly, we don't.
Yeah, there is no public transport, there are no toilets, and I think this is where Bangalore scores a little better than Chennai, because there are more public toilets, like Nirmala toilets. In Chennai, we don't see public toilets at all. And there is open defecation, there is urination, along the water bodies and everywhere. So I think,
my dear Amrit, only if you knew what happens all the way back in Bihar and UP.
Yes.
That's forget about Chennai. That's a different story altogether.
Right.
But Mr. Vishwanath, I'll bring you in. And the question I want to ask is, we talk about, there's a finite planet and there's this infinite madness of growth that we see. How do we balance it out? Because I'm sure a lot of times, either of you, and even you, Amrit, would be debating this with a lot of people who say that, yes, but then there has to be growth. It happened in the case of the Tuticorin anti-Sterlite protest. How do you find that balance?
So that's a tough question that we have to ask ourselves as to how we move away from this notional measure of GDP as the only form of growth, but to expand it to include ecological health and social health, right? So there are alternatives that are coming of measures themselves, like the Human Development Index, for example, or the Gross National Happiness Index, for example. So those indexings will have to change, and they'll have to change at a DNA level of the economy itself. We'll have to switch to circular economies, routes by which consumption or production is merged and it becomes prosumption, as it is called. We'll have to find those alternatives very quickly too. We'll have to find it in a context of rapid urbanization and terrific groundwater depletion. We are the world's largest consumer of groundwater, and the crisis that we are talking about, that one crisis that is going to hit us, if it has not already hit us, is water. And that water, and for that, we'll need imaginative solutions.
The fact that Bangalore will reach 0 day in terms of water, is it like an urban legend, or will it actually happen?
It's an urban legend.
That's
it's never
it's
going
not
to
that
happen.
bad.
It's never going to happen. The city will buy water from as far as it's possible. It's the villages which will suffer, and the farmers that will suffer. It's very optimistic, but that's the way it is. But a city which has 60% of the GDP of a state can afford to buy that water. But then will it put in place systems to make sure that that water which is taken is used efficiently, whether it's returned back to nature in conditions by which nature can appropriate it easily. Those are the bigger questions that we need to ask, not whether it's day 0 or not.
So, Mr. Nityanand, how do you walk that tightrope between development and an ecological balance?
I don't think there is a kind of that we have to have a balance between nature and development. The nature is not going to do any balancing. So any balancing that has to be done is to be done by us, which means how do you design an economy that stays within the bounds of nature? And the challenging part of it is how do you do it so that it is socially equitable and just? What we have now is a free-for-all, and in the free-for-all, the guys who have it the most take even more. So it's not just an environmentally exploitative, but it's extremely socially exploitative system. And for instance, even with the whole thing of water transfer, which we're talking about here, saying that we're bringing it from a distant place to a city. And Chennai is also guilty of robbing water from other communities, be it groundwater. So groundwater, what happens in Chennai is Metro Water and private tankers go to the landowner, pay a certain amount, and suck the entire district dry. And that is bottled and sold in the city. It's a big business, but it's an extremely problematic kind of a operation that leaves us extremely insecure in the future. So how can one, even if I were to assume that I consume this water, treat it properly, and use it somewhere, it still doesn't take away from the fact that I've robbed communities of their groundwater. And I've robbed future generations of the groundwater. You're taking groundwater, and you're not going to be able to put it back that deep into the ground. In some of the places, we're taking it several hundred feet beneath the ground. It's going to take a long time for the rainwater to percolate over there. And we have better experts to talk about that. So I have that concern about the basic environmental injustice that is inherent in long distance transfers of water.
Amrit, you wanted to come in earlier?
What was the question again, sorry?
About trying to balance, and it's difficult to find one, is how you do work it best in terms of development, and when you're talking about GDPs and you're talking about the economy, and then you have an ecology to deal with, which of course has a mind entirely of its own.
I mean, like he said, it's very difficult to have a balance now, but I think one way we can address it is illegal construction and over water bodies, and that's been a big problem. One of the major issues why there was Chennai floods. So we need to figure out how we can tackle that issue. I think illegal construction.
Find a way. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, for the audience here, because most of you are really interested in doing your 2 bits. So that doesn't, so even if it is surface, it's not to use a straw and get onto a paper straw. That doesn't mean you stop doing that. But I'm sure some of you have questions because we have these activists. We'll get a mic to you, I know. Just raise your hands and we'll make sure a mic reaches you. Can we get a mic to the to that young boy there? I'm getting, no, sir. Sir, you look really young, but I think there's one younger sitting right behind you, right there. Yeah, he's getting a mic to you, and you could ask your question.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Hello, sir. My question is very simple. See, when we are looking at plastic, like you are speaking about plastic and also about water conservation. Now, when there is an alternative like polylactic acid that, for there is a alternative like PLA, you call it polylactic acid, which comes from sugarcane or from corn, wherein when I saw the analytics, we are not even importing the PLA resins that are biodegradable, not just for using for the water bottles. So when there is a solution or a technology in the outer countries, why isn't India taking that? Why is it India using that? And also, when we speak about the water conservation, when there is a river rally that was done by the people, the private people, or the Swamiji, or the person who, I don't know his name, but
that's okay,
when it
but
is
what's
done,
your question? Yeah.
yeah, like when we have technology in hand, like Manoj Bhargav is coming up with different new things like electricity generation, water conservation and all that. And also, if you see, you speak that metro, like for example, metro, you say it's a cleaner transportation. But don't you think that particular power to run the metro is coming from a coal-based plant, which is beside that, which is polluting?
But maybe the sheer numbers balance it out, but I'm not the expert. Which one of you would like to take that question?
Yeah.
So you want,
I can take one, and I think Vishwanath be better placed to take the one on water. On metro, see what you're doing is, yes, you're probably right. In a state like Tamil Nadu, where about 70 to 75% of your electricity comes from coal, moving it to a metro would mean a certain amount of carbon footprint from the coal-fired power plants. But what we should also realize is that you also have, you're displacing a large number of private vehicles on the road, which per passenger that is moved spews a lot more carbon. So seen in that scheme of things, it is better to have public transportation because it declogs your road. But even better would be to have your electricity from cleaner sources. So from coal, if you have other sources that are powering the metro, that is even better. On the water, which I think Vishwanath probably explained better, just one thing that I would say is the issue is not what this container is made of. The issue is what he asked. Why are we drinking water from containers now? Somewhere something is broken. I think we need to answer that question. We often go after answering the wrong questions. And if you answer the wrong question, your answer will be wrong.
Mr. Vishwanath, you want to? That's been answered. All right. Who wanted a question? Yes, the gentleman with the mic.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Regarding the plastic ban, I guess in Maharashtra and all, plastic ban was done, but there was a huge hue and cry. Still at the grassroots level, if you see to the, I go to the vegetable vendor, they still prefer using the plastic bags. And I asked him, and when I denied, they said that, okay sir, you are denying, but there are some customers who are not willing to take the vegetables if they don't get the plastic bags. And plastic bags are already have a huge impact. So how do we change the things at grassroots level? Is a direct ban, it's a solution for the issue, or do we need to do things at a larger level or a greater awareness?
Some states, I'll throw that question because we try and get, some states have been they've managed to engineer a ban. Like Himachal Pradesh has actually managed to engineer this ban.
Yeah, and one more add-on question. I guess in UCL, Uranium Corporation of India, I'm not sure whether you are aware or not in Jadugoda and all. So still many of the villages, they are suffering from the uranium radiation and all. But for the uranium, for the sake of uranium and its production, it's somewhat critical to the country from the power consumption as well as energy. But they are still producing at the cost of the lives of the villagers. Many of the village children are they are getting birth with the deformities. So how do we address this? Means again, as she has already asked, the balance between the development and the cost of living.
All right. So which one wants to take the first question on the plastic?
Oh, well, we have to ask. We have to also know that there is something like 800 to 900 million tons of plastic reaching the oceans every year. That's the kind of scale at which we are creating the problem. So these minor inconveniences at the Bhajiwala level will have to be addressed by us if we are concerned about the greater damage that's been doing. And it's going to take some time for it to kick in, right? It's going to take a lot of legal measures, but also alternatives that will have to come in, which are easy or as convenient as plastic used to be. So I think it's going to be progressive, graduated improvements, but we must realize the gravity of the problem and then only act on that particular problem. Regarding the uranium question, I think Nitya is the better person to
Any
answer.
quick solutions from your
Can,
end?
I'd like to take one more question, so just, yeah, quickly.
On the issue of Uranium Corporation of India, first of all, nuclear power does not contribute significantly to India's electricity, so we don't have to worry about it. You shut down all the nuclear power plants, you lose even a light bulb. So that's not a problem. The issue with uranium is more about nuclear bombs and looking masculine in the world stage. The question that comes up, when you need uranium, people are going to get hurt, because it's very difficult to mine uranium from an inhabited area without hurting people. And there what we say, but we need development. So development is like an omelette. I need to break an egg in order to have an omelette. The egg is you, I will eat the omelette. And that is what we are saying. And that consistently, it is the poor, it is the indigenous people, it is the farmers, and it is the Dalit peasants who are asked to pay the price for our luxuries, our needs. And that is the imbalance, and that is the perverseness of this, perversity of this model of growth.
All right. But even when you talk about plastic, even if you remove it from the beaches, from your house, where does it go? Last question, I think.
There is, in fact, a recycling system being set in place. My name is Sohan. So, yes, this is the young man that you pointed out to earlier. So,
very dapper, sir. Yes.
Compared to what is happening globally and what's going to happen, say, 50 or 100 years from now, the things we're talking about right now, plastics and single-use straws and things like that, are very insignificant, I feel. So my question, I have a lot of preamble to say, but Vizag is most susceptible to our oceans getting damaged. It happens every day. In fact, all these bottles, half of them will land up in our sea within the next 4 or 5 days. So asking a question is whether the conclave, next time that you have it, will avoid.
Sir, we will totally endeavor to do that.
Excellent.
And we'll try and make it completely plastic-free.
Great and excellent. My original question I wanted to ask is, since this stuff is insignificant and you gentlemen have worked so much on this, can you tell me, are we really over the tipping point as far as mass extinction or
Apocalypse.
A cataclysmic event happening within the next century?
Well, the good news is yes. We're over the tipping point. And
So no matter how young you are, you should drop your will.
Yeah.
Not that there's anyone to leave it to then.
It's not good enough to kid ourselves. We've lost 60% of insect species. That was a report just 1 week back in the last years of our living. We are in the age of Anthropocene, and with climate change, a lot of it is irreversible. We are already past the tipping point. So
Yesterday they just shortened the timeline.
correct. So enjoy your drink while it lasts.
Oh, that's rather bleak.
Excuse me. We have recently seen the Kerala disaster, and it has thrown up many lessons to all of us, particularly the policymakers and the people as well. And I would like to pose a question to you, whether can we generate a people-centric policy action, so leading to some sort of a policy corrections elsewhere, or how do we make people partners in the entire building up of the entire climate change adaptation? What are the strategies that we have to do it? Can we think of, recently we have seen since morning we have seen various political discussions. How can we shape up the things to come?
Okay, first of all, I think that, yes, I agree with the speaker who said that, there is, when you're asking about the tipping point, I feel that there is a tipping point, but what are the consequences of the tipping point, I don't quite know. So I wouldn't really say, let's throw the towel down and let's curl up in the corner and die, or let's party to hell. But what I would say is there is definitely a lot of work to be done along the lines of what you had asked for. If you were to look at one guideline, I think that what we call growth and what we call development is essentially putting concrete or tar or steel or some kind of a building material on open ground. That is the only definition of growth and development. So if we can have the objectives or the outcomes of development delivered without covering open ground, then I think that might be so, which means revaluing open spaces so that you give it a lot more value than built spaces and call that development, which means leaving a place open or knocking down a building and setting up a wetland over there, or liberating a farmland for a forest, liberating roads for farmlands, because farmlands cannot be created anew. And I think that is where, and how do you generate an economy from the open rather than from the built? If we start doing that, then we'll be unbuilding resilience into our communities rather than building it.
All right, so we're out of time, but do other two panelists want to add a word to this, and then we'll call it a session?
I think they've added whatever
they've said what they had to.
Yeah, they've said whatever has to be said.
Sorry? Doomsday has been announced. Oh Lord, I hate to leave this session on that note.
May I
Mr.
ask one
Vishwanath,
question?
pick up that drink and address this question. Cannot.
No. So at the global level, we have to be aware of what we have done. If the Titanic is going to hit the iceberg, there's no point in rearranging the deck chairs, right? And so if you're doing that, well, गालिब का एक शेर याद आता है ना, दिल को बहलाने के लिए गालिब ख्याल अच्छा है करके. That ख्याल you can keep as a positive ख्याल, and it should not take away from the actions that you called for, but those actions are substantive actions of governance and institution building in a participatory democratic framework. Those are the right questions that we need to ask, not the plastic question or the straw question. That fundamental question, if we don't ask and if we don't find answers, too late.
I would just like to make sure that doomsday has not been announced. Doomsday is announced the minute you say you will throw the towel down, or you will just go for your drink and forget it. I think the fight is still on. For some of us, we can afford to not fight. For a lot of people, the choice is not there. I think for the privilege, it is extremely important that we put our privilege to work for public purpose. We need to put our bodies out there and stop it. And so I think then we would be able to lessen or soften the shock, even if we can't fully avoid it.
You know, what we really should have done is, and now I actually think about it, is we should have had this session before we had the Chief Minister in, or maybe he should have been in the audience. Have it at a time where, the noise or the voice actually goes to people who could possibly make a difference. And well, it looked very pretty to me, but now I see it very differently. But all right, on that note, I do thank our panelists. They've given us so much to think about. And let's just hope we could possibly do something and engineer whatever little change that we can. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It's been a great pleasure.